Welcome to my YouTube channel, The Fraud Detective. My name is Jesse Gossman, and here is our mission to bring you real-world fraud investigation scenarios and developing fraud trends straight from the front lines of financial crimes. So as discussed in our last video, today's episode is all about international money launderers and how you may be able to get them to provide $450,000 of additional funding to your local police department. So to check out that scenario, let's check in with Frank the Fraud Detective. It was just another typical day at the office for Frank the Fraud Detective and his partner Alex when suddenly the phone rang. On the phone was a yacht broker named Jeff. He had just sold a yacht for $450,000, but was now questioning if he had unwittingly been placed at the center of an elaborate scam. Jeff explained that he had just completed the sale of a yacht to a guy named Dale in Idaho for $450,000 that was to be delivered to Panama. His company had already been wired the funds, and the final step was to secure an insurance policy to cover the voyage to Panama. Jeff called up his insurance agent, who looked over the deal, but the insurance agent quickly realized that something did not add up, and they would just not write the policy until they could be certain everything was legit. That's when Jeff called Frank the Fraud Detective. He explained that he had arranged the deal with his client Dale entirely by phone, but that Dale had emailed him a copy of his Idaho driver's license in order to verify his identity. Frank went right to work to see if the client Dale was in fact a real person, and if so, how Frank might go about contacting him. It didn't take long for Frank to get the real Dale on the phone. Frank asked Dale if he was purchasing a $450,000 yacht. Dale replied in laughter that he was a construction worker and could hardly afford a dinghy, much less a yacht. Frank said, "Great. I'm going to call you tomorrow to take a recorded statement, and we will get this all figured out." Frank realized he messed up by not recording the previous call with Dale, but he was better prepared today. He would be able to go into greater detail and record the line. If only Dale would answer the phone. Even without the recorded statement, Frank had probable cause to believe that the $450,000 sitting in the yacht broker's account were funds used in the commission of a felony. That gave him the ability to write a seizure warrant to place a freeze on the funds at the bank, so he got to work. It was a few days later, after leaving messages with every family member of Dale's that Frank could find, that he finally got a call from Dale. But this time, the tone was different. Dale said he wanted nothing to do with this anymore, and any further questions should be directed to his attorney, Mr. Red. Shortly after that, Jeff called Detective Frank to find out what was going on. He said that he had received a call from Mr. Red threatening to sue him and his company if he did not return the funds or deliver the yacht. He told Frank that he didn't know what to do. Jeff said that he had stalled by saying his bank was just attempting to verify the account before clearing the funds, which gave Frank an idea. First, Frank researched Mr. Red's number and the phone number for the fake Dale. He soon discovered they were both voice-over IP phone numbers. Now confident Mr. Red was part of the scam, Frank decided to call Mr. Red and mask himself as a bank representative working to release his client's funds. As the call started, Frank soon realized that Mr. Red was no low-level fraudster. He was articulate and smart. He immediately asked Frank for his full name, which bank branch Frank worked at, what the physical location of his office was, and what phone number Mr. Red could call him back at. Frank hadn't been quite prepared for such scrutiny. He stalled awkwardly as he attempted to silently search Google for answers that would make sense to Mr. Red's questions and hoped Mr. Red wouldn't bother to verify his claims. But Mr. Red dashed those hopes as he said, "I will call you right back," and disconnected. When Frank's phone rang again, it was Mr. Red. He said the bank had no clue who he was and demanded to know with whom he was speaking. Knowing the jig was up, Frank asserted that he was a detective investigating the case and wanted to know where the money came from. Mr. Red's only response was that Frank was a sorry detective. The call quickly ended, but not before Mr. Red threatened to sue Frank and his department if all the funds were not immediately released. The call was not a waste, however. Frank had learned something interesting. The voice of Mr. Red was the same voice used on the voicemail messages for the fake Dale. With no other leads, Frank then turned to the source of the money. It had come to the yacht broker's account from two separate wires, both from defunct entities out of South Africa with French corporate officers. Even more interesting, one of those entities showed as being reported in the Panama Papers as a potential shell company used for money laundering. Frank made multiple attempts to try to track down the South African businesses or French officers, but it was a wild goose chase, likely by design. Despite Mr. Red's boisterous claims of lawsuits and hollow threats, he soon faded away. The question still remained as what to do with the $450,000. Because they were funds used to facilitate the commission of a felony, namely the registration of a vessel in a false name and criminal use of identity, they became subject to forfeiture. I'll spare you the boring details, but suffice it to say that a lot of notices had to go out to South Africa, France, Idaho, and to all the people previously mentioned. But in the end, surprise, surprise, no one wanted to show up in court and lay claim to the money, and Frank went back to his desk to await the next call. So let's do a quick recap of Frank's investigation. So Frank was contacted by Jeff and told that this guy Dale, who was purchasing a yacht, may or may not be a real person. Frank wasted no time in trying to find the true identity of Dale and confirm with Dale that he in fact was not purchasing a yacht. Frank immediately recognized that this meant a crime had occurred, and that was a crucial first step because the number one priority was to freeze that money so Frank had time to figure out what was going on. So by doing that, by identifying the crime had occurred and what the crime was, it gave Frank the ability to write a search warrant and seize those funds until the rest of it could be figured out. So let's talk about a few things that Frank did right, a few things that Frank could have maybe improved upon. So I think his pros, he immediately recognized that the crime had occurred, and he took the steps necessary to develop the probable cause he needed to support the seizure warrant. He then wasted no time in acting on that and followed through by seizing those funds and attempting to find the true identity of the persons involved with both the wire transfers as well as the corporate entities and the true identity of Dale. Now, where could he be improved? Well, first and foremost, Frank got a little bit lazy and he didn't bring his phone recording equipment when he first contacted Dale. So that could have been a crucial piece of evidence had this gone forward, and it would have been outstanding to have locked in Dale right from the beginning as confirming that he was not the person who was purchasing that yacht. Because as we saw in the scenario, somehow, some way, either Dale changed his mind or someone got to Dale and had him no longer cooperate with Frank. So additionally, Frank should have also thought a bit more about his backstory when he decided to call Mr. Red pretending to be from the bank. Mr. Red was pretty sharp, and so Frank was left to stumble and come up with story on the fly, which obviously doesn't work as well had he really prepared. So the question we're left is, what really happened here, right? Was this an attempt for someone to transport illicit funds that were made in the drug trade or some other illicit activity? Or was this some rich person in America, England, Russia, that was just attempting to buy a yacht on the sly without maybe paying taxes or maybe to hide it from their wife? I really don't know, and I don't think Frank knows either, because there was a lot of unanswered questions in this. So that's why I'll throw this to you out there. Why would someone use a fake ID of someone else to purchase a yacht in South Florida, but not take delivery of that yacht until it reached Panama? The payments for which that yacht was paid coming from two overseas defunct entities with French citizens listed as the corporate officers. There's a lot of unknowns in this. And though no one went to jail in it, We're going to throw this one in the win column for Frank, because in the end, the $450,000 was money that was being laundered for some unknown reason, and Frank was able to stop that. All right, here's a sneak peek for next week. How does someone with a 500 credit score get a whole bunch of new credit cards and new loans they're never going to have to pay back? All thanks to the magic of synthetic identities, authorized user lines, and credit privacy numbers. Join us next week, and we'll tell you what you need to look out for.